Hello, this is Dr. Melorani. First and foremost, I hope each of you is staying safe and also looking out for the welfare of your family, friends, and neighbors. I know together we'll get through this. If you have any questions or problems about the course materials or other matters at MCPHS University, please email me. I'll do everything I can to support you. This is week 3 of 4 where we focus on market structures. This week we're going to look at something called oligopolies. And in addition, I have a special topic on the financial crisis, part 1, which we're going to look at what the financial crisis is and what are some of the reasons that it occurred. So as will be the case every week, there's basically a 3-step process. You review the materials this week on oligopolies and the financial crisis, participate in the discussion board questions, and then handle the graded assignment. The graded assignment can be done multiple times, so everybody should get a good score, and only your highest score will count. And okay. So let's start by looking at the market structures, the market structure of oligopolies. Okay, so we're going to find out what the meaning of oligopoly is and why it occurs. We'll find out what the incentives are for oligopolists to act in the way that they do and how they can benefit from tacit collusion. Also take a look at something called the game theory and prisoner's dilemma, and how repeated interactions among oligopolists can help them achieve this tacit collusion, and then what the antitrust policies are regarding oligopolies and how they're monitored by the Federal Trade Commission. So the definition of an oligopoly, it's a market structure where there are generally few firms. The product can be either standardized or differentiated, and the entry is difficult. And so when we look at barriers to entry, there can be a multitude of barriers to entry. So common industries, we live with them every day. Cable television, the entertainment industry, airline, mass media, and the industry that we're all directly involved with, the pharmaceutical industry. And the list goes on. Okay, so it's a very common form of industry in the United States. And when we look at the spectrum of the market structures ranging from perfect competition through monopoly, what we know is that if I'm a supplier, I prefer not to be in a highly competitive market because that's where profits are lowest. So one way of achieving a delay to go to highly competitive markets is this creation of an oligopoly. And it happens in a variety of ways. It can happen through acquisitions. It can happen through other barriers like patents and copyrights, access to natural resources, and the like. But clearly, this is a much preferred alternative than perfect competition from the supplier's perspective, because the profits are higher and the market share is generally one that's fairly stable. So I've offered some examples here, which you can read through: mass media, phones, automobiles, etc. One of the things I'll ask you to do this week is to pick out an industry and identify the companies in there and discuss why they're an oligopoly. So a small number of firms in the industry. Any decision a firm makes, it takes into account the expected reaction of other firms. And often there's a leader in the industry. So if you think about soft drinks, Coke is clearly the leader in that industry. And other firms look at what Coke is going to do. So if Coke keeps prices stable, it's in other firms' best interest to keep prices stable. If Coke raises prices, then generally people follow that. So there's interdependence. The oligopoly can be collusive or non-collusive, and if it is collusive, then it can't be. It has to be something called tacit collusion, which is basically I'm not overtly cooperating with you, but I kind of follow the signals and I it's in my best interest to react to what the leader in the market is doing. So this is the strategic decision making where I respond to the market leader and try to stay under the umbrella of the overall market structure. So one of the reasons why cable prices and soft drinks and other things tend to be around the same price is that not because of the cost, it's because other firms recognize that if the market leader can maintain a certain level of profitability for themselves, then I can also enjoy that. If I try to lower prices and get a bigger market share, then the market leader is probably going to respond and everybody loses. So there tends to be a tacit collusion that goes on. And there's also interdependence, right? So usually just a handful of firms, and there's a recognition that if Texaco wishes to increase its market share by reducing price, then everyone else is going to reduce their market share and everybody loses. So what happens is that there's really no incentive to be highly competitive. So this is the game theory, or the prisoner's dilemma, that helps to you to understand that. And there is a video on the game theory which I'd like you to take a look at. So the game theory, because firms cannot act independently, they must anticipate the likely response of a rival to any given change in price or their non-price activity. So oligopolists have to make critical decisions such as whether to compete with the rival or collude with them, raise or lower prices. And the advantage of going first or going second are respectively called first and second mover advantages. So generally, there is a dominant firm in the industry. And the other thing that's key is that there's barriers to entry. So it's not easy for people to get into this. So you think about cable television, you think about soft drink industry, there's a very high barrier to entry. Sometimes in the pharmaceutical industry might be patents. In other industries, it might be branding and advertising. In other industries, it might be access to certain natural resources, but there are barriers that make it difficult for competition to enter. So you're in a kind of a protected class of firms. So here's a list of the barriers to entry. Economies of scale. This is something that Intel has used for years. Ownership of key scarce resources, high cost of entry, high research and development costs, which you see in the pharmaceutical industry. And there can also be artificial barriers, right? Superior knowledge, predatory acquisitions, predatory pricing, advertising, brand loyalty, and exclusive contracts, etc. So there's no single model of oligopoly behavior. When competing, oligopolists prefer non-price competition or to avoid price wars. And if the market leader decides they want a larger market share, they can afford it, then they can certainly do that. But typically, they try to avoid these things. They could use predatory pricing to force out rivals, or limited pricing strategy to deter entrants. So often there's informal collusive behavior, and prices tend to be sticky, so they don't change frequently, and certainly they seldom want to lower prices. So cartels exist throughout the world, but they're illegal in the United States because what a cartel is basically a formal overt collusion or covert collusion among firms. So OPEC, for example, the Organization of Oil Exporting Countries, is a classic cartel. And they basically agree on output quotas, they agree on pricing, and as long as everybody plays by the rules, then everybody gets the market share and the price they expect. There is sometimes incentives for cheating, and so cartels, economists believe in the long term, are not likely to be successful. But so this is illegal in the US, but it certainly does happen throughout the world. So small number of firms, So here's the kind of the spectrum that I've talked about. So firms find the least amount of profitability with perfect competition. So if I can maintain some control in this oligopoly, much more desirable. Okay. So whether something an oligopoly or not, there's actually a test of market share, and it's called the HHI index, Herfindahl-Hirschman index. And basically, what they do is they take the top firms in the industry and they square the market share, and based on that, they come up with a score. And if it's above a certain level, then it's considered an oligopoly. If it's an oligopoly, then it gets specific scrutiny from the federal government, the Federal Trade Commission. So according to the Justice Department guidelines, an HHI score below 1,000 is strongly competitive. Between 1,000 and 1,800 indicates a somewhat competitive market. Above 1,800 indicates an oligopoly. So for example, if we're a monopoly, the score would be 100 squared, which is 10,000, right? So just to give you some perspective. So if the top competitors have a score above 1,800, it's considered an oligopoly. Okay, again, let's not worry about the details of the calculation. Just understand that there is a process to evaluate whether there's a certain market structure in place, and when there is that market structure in place, then the Federal Trade Commission and the federal government should give special attention to what goes on in that particular industry, with hopefully the idea of benefiting the consumer. Okay, here's again, the Justice Department guidelines. Here's some examples, a little dated, but give you a general idea as to what might be an oligopoly and what might not. So retail grocers, not at all internet service providers, right? Then you have operating systems, aircraft carriers, etc. So again, lots of industries fall into this category. Okay, not difficult to find. There's also something called a duopoly, which is basically two firms. So oligopolies in practice operate under legal restrictions in the form of antitrust policies. Antitrust policies try to prevent oligopolies from becoming or behaving like monopolies. But many succeed in achieving this tacit collusion. So, and if it breaks down, they have a price war. So firms prefer, and oligopolies prefer to compete on non-price competition. Right? That's why you see lots of ads for soft drinks, for pharmaceutical products, and the like, because they're competing on something other than price. So General Motors, another example. All right, so that is everything I want to discuss on oligopolies at this point. So next I'm going to talk about the financial crisis part 1. That'll be in the next video.